Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Mind, Your Reality, Your Results. I'm super happy to have you with us today. My name's Leah Fink. I'm the owner of All Thrive, where we help people through personal development workshops that focus on mental health. I am super excited to be here today with Andrea Richards with Fresh Start Mediation. We are going to be having an amazing conversation about negotiating through conflict. And I certainly know that everyone out there has probably experienced some conflict in their life, in their personal life, in their business life. And of course, the last thing we want it to do is break relationship or damage our situation, whether that's, once again, personally or business wise. And yeah, I'm just so excited to have you here, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Leah. I'm so excited to be here. I mean, conflict is part of life, so we all need to know how to negotiate through it.
Excellent. Well, and you certainly have expertise in this area. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my background actually originally was in, I was a legal secretary for a family lawyer for some time. And then I was in human resources for many years. So I did a lot of business mediation and negotiation and, going through all that. And then I transitioned into doing family separation and divorce mediation because I wanted to be able to help people in that more personal way at home and in their family lives. So yeah, definitely a couple different fields, but very, very related.
Excellent. And I'm personally of the belief that there is not actually necessarily the big difference between personal and business that we think there is, especially when it comes to things like conflict resolution, that you need to be able to engage with people on all levels, and those skills are cross applicable. So when you start talking to people about dealing with conflict, working with conflict in their life, what are some of the first things that you address, or how would you even describe this to them?
Well, really, conflict, people tend to use it synonymously with combat, which they're not the same thing. Conflict is just that you're not in agreement. That's it. That's simple. I have conflicts with my 3-year-old every day, right? Like, you're just not in agreement. So really recognizing that a conflict doesn't have to be negative, I would say, would be the first thing. Recognizing it's there and that it can be dealt with in a healthy way.
I completely agree with you 100%. I actually also believe that conflict can be a great point of growth in a relationship,
Absolutely.
which I'm sure you would speak to as well. I also forgot to mention at the beginning that if you are watching this live, do feel free, please, to comment. If you have any questions for Andrea or myself, we would love to be able to answer them. And even if you are seeing this not live after the fact, if you want to leave a question or comment in there, we will definitely get back to you. So just wanted to put that out there. So our first step is realizing conflict is just a disagreement between two people.
Yes.
Obviously, people may have a emotional attachment to their viewpoint, which I'm guessing you see an awful lot.
Yes.
How do you help people, especially in a situation maybe like business, which I know a lot of the people watching are going to be business owners, entrepreneurs, when they're in a situation, especially with a client, and they're starting to feel that conflict coming up and they're starting to feel the emotions around that. Do you have any ideas or tips that you would give them for how to kind of help regulate themselves or move past that in a good way?
Absolutely. So the first thing you want to do is recognize you're feeling emotion. There's even physical indicators. You feel hot. When they say you get tunnel vision or your vision goes red, that is actually legitimate. That can happen. Feel that you're starting to lose that grip and acknowledge that you're starting to feel that emotion. Because if you don't acknowledge that, you can't step back from that emotion and take the time you need to calm down. Dealing with something when you're in the middle of a heightened emotion is going to tend to lead to escalation, which is not usually going to end up in a constructive disagreement. You're going to have a destructive argument, which is just where it's going to go nowhere. There's going to be no good conclusion at the end of it, right? So, I'm sorry.
You've got a bit of a destructive argument going behind you.
I can hear my daughter. Just one second.
This is the joy of LinkedIn Live.
I'm so sorry. Tether timing is never great, I tell you. So yeah, what what you want to do first is acknowledge that emotion. And if you can, take a few minutes to step back and calm down if it's heightened. Give yourself that couple of minutes. There's nothing wrong with saying to someone, I'm too emotional right now. I can't handle it right this second. Just give me a couple minutes to get myself gathered, to process it, right? And I understand that other people might need that too. So that would be a really important step. And the other one is you want to separate that emotion from the actual topic. What is the conflict about? Because usually a conflict is about a thing, an action that happened, a mistake that was made. It's not actually about the person. So you need to separate the person and the thing and talk about the action, not let it get into a personal fight or a name. We don't want to do name calling. We don't want to say you always whatever. Nobody always does something. Nobody never does something. There's always fluctuations in our behavior. Yeah. So that I would say is really important. And these things take time. It's important to recognize that this is a skill, which means it gets developed over time. So don't worry if you're not perfect at it at first, for sure, at taking that step back. Sometimes we have to look back at previous conflicts and analyze what happened, what went well. When I said that, how did that person react? Think these things through. I always find that's actually a good place to start if you're wanting to improve your style, is actually look back at a previous conflict and kind of analyze it step by step. But definitely first steps, try to separate yourself from that emotion and take that step back to separate the person from the problem.
Yes, that's so true. And when you talk about it being a skill, that is the hardest part, is looking at for yourself. If you look at an argument from the outside, I think people usually find that quite a bit easier. So I love that you're saying to practice it. Can I also ask a question? When you mentioned before with conflict of it's okay to say, take a step back from a situation, and you were mentioning the emotions that might come up, the hot and the tunnel vision. I know in conflict, especially for some women, when they see maybe especially an angry, elevated man in front of them, their conflict emotion style might be actually fear or sadness, right? So they're dim in emotions and they're told they're emotional. How would you recommend maybe that they kind of protect themselves or are able to work through an emotion like that where they feel they might be judged for showing that kind of softer emotional side? I've been using stereotypes here. I definitely do not agree with this, but that's how they're perceived.
I would say those softer emotions are the same as the harder emotions. So anger is actually a protecting emotion. Anger traditionally was used to motivate us to do things, right? You got angry to protect your family. So we don't see it as a protecting emotion because it can be quite aggressive, but it is still actually protecting something. When you look at why a person is angry, it's usually because they were hurt. Something was happening there. So if you're feeling kind of vulnerable and you have a hard time with conflict, it's going to be just as important for you to try to separate that this conflict isn't about you personally. Right? That's even more than just dealing with anger and like, don't attack somebody. You want to remember that this isn't about you personally, and take the step back and recognize some boundaries. So if it's gotten to the point where there's dangerous things happening, name calling, things like that, obviously you definitely want to walk away from that. That's not in any way a constructive argument. You want to say, look, it's getting to be a bit too much for me. I need to take a break so we can deal with this in a good way. But yeah, the irony is the emotions are different, but yet they come from the same place, usually a place of protecting ourselves. So because I know a lot of people, nobody likes to deal with conflict. I've had people say to me, oh, you must really like conflict. And I'm like, no, I don't. I don't like conflict. I just recognize it has to happen. And actually, even in my marriage, like my being in conflict with my husband has actually improved our marriage. If I can say to him, when this happened, this is how it made me feel. And he hears what I'm saying and he recognizes that. And he says, oh, I didn't want to make you feel that way. You know, if I'm dealing with an employee at work, when I was dealing with my subordinates, and I was saying, so this was your action and this was the result. This is what happened. This is where, you know, our client was, this is back in HR, but there was, I said to one person, she lied to one of our customers, one of our clients, which was not obviously acceptable to business practices. And it also was, I mean, upsetting to the client themselves. And we said, look, like this is what happened, but this was the result. And we talked through it. We talked through the action. Yeah. And she didn't, I had to laugh because I said, we've dealt with this. If there's no repeat, you know, we just talked about it. She acknowledged, yeah, I can see where a mistake was made. I can see what I should have done. We talked through what would have been better choices. And I said, okay, it's done. If it doesn't happen again, we never need to talk about it again. She didn't believe me. She told me that later. We had her review, her 3-month review about 6 weeks later, and it was never mentioned. And she's like, I didn't believe you that it would be done and done. Yeah. But it was an act. It wasn't the person, right? Like it was done and done. We never had a problem again. So I never brought it up again because why? You know, we got to make sure those things are dealt with. So really, especially at work, people feel bullied if you draw them personally into it. But if you can keep it focused on that thing. And when you're talking about solutions, a really good strategy, one, make sure, yes, as you know, whether you're the supervisor or you're just a fellow employee, you want to be heard. You also need to make sure the other person is heard as well. And the great way to make sure they feel heard, because you may have heard them and not necessarily acknowledge it, is paraphrase back what they've said. Reframe it, rephrase it. So if someone says, you know, that person called and they were yelling at me and I just couldn't take it anymore. I'd had this, and this happen. And that was just icing on the cake. And I broke and I just lost it and I yelled back. So I can say, so what I'm hearing is you were having a really rough day and you were already feeling quite triggered and emotional. And then this person called and they started blaming, you felt they were blaming you for what was happening and taking their anger out on you. And you just didn't feel you could handle it anymore and you lost control. And they go, yes, you know, they've heard you. You can see it in their face when someone feels heard because they go, yeah. There's like almost this relief because that weight's been lifted. And you always want to make sure the other person feels heard. And the best reason for paraphrasing back is so you know you understood them. Because what I hear may not be what they said. and that's where a lot of conflict comes from. So using simple strategies of that paraphrasing and rephrasing and leaving it as, am I correct? Do I have that right? Yeah. So that they have the opportunity to correct it if you don't, if you misunderstood them. Because we all have filters. And there can be so many filters. There is the environment you grew up in. There's the school you went to. There is, you know, the work environment you work in. There's what happened that morning getting ready for work. That filters your day. And so because we all hear those filters, I hear through my filter may not be what someone said. And so definitely, I would say if I left any tip you take home today, paraphrase, and check back that you understood. And you will find so many of your disagreements, doesn't matter if they're personal or work, that just disappear because you're hearing what each other are saying. And then you can work towards solutions together. At that point, you can say, well, what could we have done differently? Or what would be a better way, do you think, to move forward?
Yeah. Yes. It all comes down to that understanding that I like to think of it, you know, if we're two people in a relationship, there's like a third person between us, and they are the relationship. They're that space where everything can get caught up in all the misunderstandings. And I totally love what you're saying about taking that time to clarify. I think making sure that you are at that point, you're coming back from the argument, so you are calm after this point. This probably isn't going to work very well when you are still in elevated state. So just reminding people that once they come down might be a better time to do that paraphrasing. And I just want to point out, we got a question here. So Parvane, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Apologies if I didn't. She's asking, what do you do when you express your feelings a few times, but there are no changes? Just an easy question, right?
Yeah. So that's a hard one, because there's a couple situations. It's why isn't there changes, right? So is it the person forgets? They've gotten in a habit. We all fall into habits. That's how we function. As human beings, if we don't make things habits, we would be overloaded all the time, right? It's why our bodies breathe without us thinking about it, because there's just so much that we're processing. So it's really, because I know it's so hard. You're like, do you actually want to change? Do you care about what I'm saying here? That's really tough. In a work setting, if it's a performance issue, there is a performance process to go through. If you're talking about something that's a performance issue and you have tried to put strategies in place with them and it's not working out, you know, the HR side of me is like, if it's affecting job performance and it's that bad, you may end up performance managing somebody out of the company. And I hate to do that. That was like the worst part of my job. I hated it. But in the end, if you're not happy with someone's performance and you're constantly trying to performance manage them, they're not going to be happy there either. Yeah. And that's the reality of a workplace. In personal relationships, you have to evaluate how invested you are in that relationship and how invested the other person is, and have a serious talk with them about just how it affects you, whatever they're doing. And ask them, like, what are you hearing? Maybe they lots of people don't rephrase or paraphrase. Lots and lots of people. So say, what are you hearing when I say this? How do you hear that it's affecting me? Because I want to make sure that I'm communicating in a way that we understand each other. Because maybe they're just not hearing what you're saying. Now, I mean, obviously, if you get to a point where you've repeatedly gone through things, you have to decide how big the issue is. Is it they don't put the tooth on the cap on the toothpaste, or they squeeze the toothpaste the wrong way? And you have to decide what we call is your BATNA. It's BATNA, and it stands for your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So what are you willing to walk away from type thing? Like, you know, is the toothpaste or how the toilet roll sits that important? Or are you just going to let it go? Or if it's a serious issue, is this something that you can live with if they're unwilling to change? And I hate doing ultimatums. I'm a big believer in really trying to communicate through things and just help somebody see the other side. So, I mean, if it's a big issue, I really recommend seeking out a counselor or a mediator or someone. Sometimes, as much as we love other people, we don't always hear and take seriously what they're saying, which is terrible, but it's true. And so hearing it through a third party can really help. So I do recommend trying that if it's a serious issue, because some people, you know, just they were never taught good listening skills or great relationship skills. And so having someone help them through that can make a big difference. So I'm sorry, it's a tough question without specifics. Yeah. There's a lot of different avenues. I'm a proponent for trying as many solutions as you feel you can. But if it comes to that point, I mean, you know, depending on how serious it is, if it's, I've asked you not to hit me and you keep hitting me, and it's my husband, I'll call the cops. That's my solution. If it's not that serious and it's, he, I don't know what's an annoying, every husband has an annoying habit, like everyone's wife does too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. My husband and I do it the same way, but I know for some people squeezing the toothpaste the wrong way is like drives them crazy. It's true. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth the fight? Yeah. Because in the end, if it's not really worth the fight, it's not a big deal. You might just have to let it go.
Yeah. And I would agree that's probably the same in business relationships. You always want to know your own personal boundary of what's acceptable, not acceptable. And if I can add one more thing as well to that piece, in addition to not always being great about hearing feelings and acknowledging what's happening, I think sometimes we're not always great at actually saying what we want. We're very good at saying what we don't want. So I found that in a lot of conflict pieces that I've seen or supported people with, it's saying, hey, stop doing the toothpaste that way. And all they hear is do the toothpaste that way. It's this weird thing of our brain where they just kind of miss the stop. You're just reinforcing. And especially even with behaviors that you maybe are okay with moderating a little bit, right? Doesn't have to be 100% this way, but you've got to tell them what the step is. What do you actually want out of this? And so I think that can also be a really helpful one for people, is be very clear on what a good outcome would be for you, whether that's the perfect outcome or first step, a small step to start, I would say is also just really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's also expressing the need behind it. So there's a need behind everything. So when my husband and I got married, he would always hang his coat up on the back of the chair, and it drove me up the wall because I felt like I wasn't being appreciated and I was being treated like a maid. There was an expectation that I would hang his coat up for him. And so saying repeatedly, can you hang up your coat? Can you hang up your coat? Is going to do nothing but make me mad. Over time, it builds resentment and anger. But saying to him, when I find the coats and the clothes lying around, I feel that there's an expectation for me to clean up after you, and that is my job. And that makes me feel like I am not valued, is a wake-up call. Because then someone goes, well, you're my spouse and I love you, or you're a person I care about. I don't want you to feel like I don't value you. And so it can be very important to express the need behind it, because that can make a really big difference than just saying, I'm not your maid, hang up your coat, which my mom used to say to me growing up.
Yeah, I would use the language personally of feedback, and we're always giving each other this lovely unconscious feedback, like hang up your coat, I'm not your maid.
Yeah.
And the intentionality is, if you can make it more real, that piece of how does this actually affect my feelings and our relationship? Because all feedback's about relationship, about building or destroying trust, about building or destroying love and caring. Then it becomes an investment in a relationship, like you've talked about already. And you mentioned before, when we've talked about, making sure that conflict is productive. And this is that piece. Did you have, another tip maybe for people? And actually, no, we've got another question. So I'm going to go that way first, because we have covered a little bit of this. So Mark asks, how do you feel about the axiom that sometimes saying no is the best way to advance the discussion?
It depends on what the discussion is about. Sometimes Mark's right. If something's not open to discussion with my children, I say no. But I also have to recognize that with an adult, usually more discussion is required because they're not a child. And no can also carry with it, depending on the person, lots of meanings behind it. So it can really be, one word answers are really hard for when you're talking about difficult conversations, because is it no, I'm not ready to talk about it right now? Is it no, I never want to talk about it? Is it no, I don't care how you feel about it, this is how it's going to be? Like no can have so many different meanings with that 1 2-letter word. Like, what does it mean?
Yeah.
So I would say that you usually have to have some explanation with the no, because no can be a trust breaking word as well.
I talked about this, funnily, this weekend. I was running a boundaries course, and we talked about the idea. It's a very similar one. No is a complete sentence, which it is. It absolutely is. If someone says,
Yep.
asks you to push a boundary and you say, no, that should
No.
be it. However, I'm with you that depending on how you follow up, it could be an impactful thing for them to hear that. And maybe I'm wondering if what Mark's asking about, the no of advancing the discussion is saying, no, we're closing this. This is no longer productive, is what I think of when I hear that no. But like you said, having that explanation of not just saying, no, we're done, but saying, I don't think we're getting anywhere with this discussion, holding that, because as soon as you give that explanation, they might try to get in and play with your explanation, which can be the hard part, but being able to say a firm no with that acknowledgement, I agree with you, is important.
Yeah. And even in a boundary situation, saying, no, this is my boundary, is still no, but now you've also let them know, here's my boundary. Right? Like, no, this is my boundary. Is like, okay, I now know that that's her boundary, and she's not just saying no because it's a bad time, or she's busy with something else, or busy day, or whatever, right? So it's okay. People think boundaries are a bad thing. They are awesome. They are important. And even boundaries in conversations, in discussions, saying, no, we need to stop because I'm feeling really emotional right now, and I don't want to say something I will regret. So I need to calm down because I won't mean it later. People can understand that. Usually people can understand that. They're like, okay, this is not a good time. Let's let you calm down because I don't want to then respond to something I'm going to regret forever.
You are 100% preaching to the choir here. And if I can put out a suggestion for the people listening as well, when you talk about being able to speak your boundaries, first you need to know your boundaries. And people spending a little intentional time to say, what is an acceptable boundary for conflict for me? I mean, for a lot of people, they probably know that an unacceptable level of boundary would be physical violence. That's a pretty obvious one. But what is the level of amount of time, or is someone's voice raised, or like you said, have they gotten to actions like name calling that have gotten dangerous? So being very aware of, for yourself, what is that limit? Because it's very hard to speak to that if you haven't actually thought about what it is, and now you're stuck in this conflict and things are escalating.
Absolutely. And that's really important. Recognizing, we call them triggers in mediation, recognizing what triggers you. And a trigger is just something that elicits an emotional response. That's a trigger. So it can be a good trigger or a bad trigger, but recognizing what your triggers are is very important so that you know what your boundaries are, for sure.
Excellent. We are starting to get near to the end of our time, but we had one more interesting question. This is going to rabbit hole us a bit, but I feel we'd both be great to talk about it. Parane also asked, how do you deal with people that cross your boundaries because they're narcissistic?
I'm going to pop a little bit of a bubble here, and I'm going to say everybody's a little narcissistic. You have to be. You to be careful for your safety, to look after your safety. So we throw around the term narcissism really, really freely in our society. So I don't like to use it. I'm not going to lie.
That's fair.
Because it is there is an actual narcissistic personality disorder that's a diagnosed disorder. Yeah. And then there's, everyone just has different levels of narcissism or self-interest. And yes, some people, just for fun, will push your boundaries just because they enjoy it. And you have to recognize that. And you have to ask yourself if that's a healthy relationship.
And
I think it's a great question, but it's true. Some people do. Some people just, they don't care what your boundary is and they want to push it. And you have to, I'm a big believer in, if you don't tell them you don't like it, they don't know. Because we're not mind readers. I wish I was, but I'm not. So one, you have to express that what they've done is hurting you, and that it's not okay for that you have a boundary there.
Okay.
And express that in a way that's not attacking, because here's the problem. We talk to people a lot about using I statements and avoiding the word you. Because when I say, you made me feel this way and you do this all the time, it's very attacking. And people stop hearing what you're saying. The first thing they do is throw up a defense wall, because they feel attacked. And that's how our brains automatically respond. It's just our natural automatic response. So try to express, when this happens, I feel, or and it can be so tricky not to use you, because we use that word a lot in our society. And it can even seem really unnatural and really kind of, I don't know.
Awkward. Yeah, totally.
Awkward, yeah. But using blaming words like you can really put somebody else on the defense, and then they're not listening. So if you can express how you're feeling, how the response something elicits in you without those blaming statements, and the person doesn't care, they just keep pushing it anyway, then, I guess you have to decide if that's a behavior that's acceptable. What's your BATNA? Where's your limit? And that's what BATNA really is. It's your boundary. Where's my limit that I'm going to? So, you have to make that decision, because yes, some people just, they enjoy it. It's not that many, but some people do just enjoy doing that. And, I can do nothing. I can't say what anyone should do, because it's, situations can just be so complex. That without specifics and kind of getting to know the individual emotions and ins and outs of a situation, it's really hard for me to help someone mediate without a lot more information. But it's really about what is it that you're comfortable with, and how it makes you feel, and have you expressed that? And do they respect what you've expressed to them? And you have to give people time to change, because change takes time.
That's a very good point. And yeah, be willing to acknowledge those first small steps, even if they're not perfect.
Yes. And they won't.
Yeah. And
ever.
it is really hard too, when you're dealing with, maybe not narcissist, unempathetic people who aren't willing to empathize or understand you. And I think it's really great what you said. I agree. If you can put ahead of time too, especially a boundary, and say, this is something I will not deal with. Yeah. This is what will happen if you keep pushing it. But then actually having to hold that is the hard part too, and realizing you might have to follow through with an action, like you said.
Yeah.
Once you reach that BATNA breaking point, do you step away from the relationship? Do you bring in outside mediation, such as yourself? Do you seek other help? So that is very well put. I think we're coming up on time. It has been so lovely to have you with us today, Andrea. Do you want to explain? We will make sure that we get your contact information in the chat here. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, they're able to. Did you want to talk a little bit about your podcast as well, if people want to look into that?
Actually, we have a podcast Fresh Start's doing. We started doing it last week. It's actually all about handling these difficult discussions that we have. Go into a lot more detail. Each episode is about a half an hour. So, and we go through a lot of steps of how to have those constructive agreement or discussions, avoid, manage your emotions, avoiding destructive arguments, recognizing needs, and all of that. So, please, on Spotify, check out Fresh Start Mediation, and you'll see our podcast there if you want more details. And feel free to contact us at any time. My email is actually Andrea@freshstartmediation.ca, so you can reach out to us at any time. We also have a website, and I'll put it in the comments as well, is www.freshstartmediation.ca. So we do no charge consults. So if anyone just even wants to ask questions, we're happy to answer the phone and answer questions and book consults with people who need a little more guidance. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. That is amazing. I love the service you offer. Obviously, when we had our first discussion, I was like, yes, this is someone I want to talk to. So thank you so much for being on the show. I've had a great time. I hope you have as well.
I have. Thank you.
And thanks so much for everyone for joining us and asking some questions. Like I said, if you are watching this not live and have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments or to either one of or both of us, and we will be happy to get back to you. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you.